Hey there, it's Kristen Crockett, and you are listening to The Plastic Couch, a podcast to help you find clarity and confidence in your life. Most of us remember someone from back in the day with a couch they kept covered with plastic. It was meant to protect and preserve the couch for tomorrow, but the plastic was hot and uncomfortable, and it kept everyone from enjoying it. So what does the plastic represent for you in your life? Is it perfection, fear, or something else? And what are you preventing yourself from enjoying? Or better yet, from being? I'm your host, Kristen Crockett, and I'm here to help you with the tools to get clarity on your path to you and to help you see what's on the other side of the plastic. If you have been a loyal follower from season 1, you know that I talk about so many different topics, and today is no different. So, by the way, have you listened to any of the season 1 episodes? Because I promise you, you are missing out. So today we are talking about near-death experiences. What happens when you literally die and are brought back to life? What are the lessons you bring with you about the human experience? So my guest today is Nicole Kerr. So imagine being 19 years old, a cadet at the Air Force Academy, when the car you are in goes off the road and you literally flatline. So did she see that famous bright light? Did she see angels? How did this moment impact her or influence who she is today? So we're going to hear today from Nicole herself as she talks about how this moment changed her life, her relationship with her parents, and her purpose in this world. So let's get into today's episode of the Plastic Couch Podcast.
So perfect. So everybody, welcome to the Plastic Couch Podcast. My guest today is Nicole Kerr. And Nicole, I cannot wait for people to hear about your story. And I want to just start off, and I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself.
Oh, well, Kristen, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I am excited, delighted, and I am very grateful that you are offering your venue for me to tell my story. Okay, so what do I want to say is I have had several near-death experiences, and my mission now as a result of those experiences. Now you have to remember the first one happened at age 19 and my memory didn't come back of it until 19 years later.
So let's start there. So let's start with the 19. So you're 19 and set us up and let us know exactly what occurred during that near-death experience.
Okay. I was one of the first female classes at the United States Air Force Academy. Okay. I am not military at all. Okay. My dad was a graduate. He wanted one of us kids to go. And I, like a lot of other people out there, are a recovering people pleaser. And my people pleasing was so dire that I really wanted to be daddy's girl. So I applied. And oh my gosh, I got in, and it's a rigorous process to get in. Well, I get out there and oh my God, 3 weeks into boot camp, I know I am in the wrong place. Okay. I had people, the abuse that goes on, especially as a first time, entry person in there. It's physical, it's mental, it's emotional. And for women, there is a lot of sexual abuse, and it did happen to me as well. So I wanted to quit. But in my family, growing up in the South, in the Bible Belt region, failure was not an option. Okay. I couldn't quit, and I didn't have permission to quit. And so I stuck it out there, and I somehow kept making it through. But the beginning of my sophomore year, my soul was like, you got to get out of this place, Nicole, it's going to kill you. And I still couldn't do it, even knowing that I needed to quit. I just couldn't make myself go in there and do it. So
let me ask you this. So let's stop there, because you said people pleasing, right? So this is all about pleasing your dad with this decision. So even when you decided that you wanted to leave, what do you think it was that wouldn't let you leave?
The shame, the humiliation, the embarrassment, the wounded pride that I had. I mean, it was an honor to be selected to go to any of the academies. And I was one of the first females from, the state of Mississippi. So it was a huge deal. I got written up in the newspaper. So to actually quit and admit that I was wrong, I just the shame on it. And my dad would have disowned me. He would have just said, look, you had the opportunity of a lifetime and you just gave it away. And so I knew him and I knew how much this would be the end of our relationship. Well, it turns out with the car crash, it was the end of our relationship anyway, because he wound up blaming me for it, even though I wasn't driving. So it was shame. I really do understand that feeling that you can't quit something because of your parents' disapproval. They won't love you anymore. There's a conditional love there. And that, that I was going to be a nobody. I was going to go back and I was just going to be a nobody. I was not special anymore. And that was my ticket to being, quote, special.
And that's so important because, when you have, we don't talk about it enough, but when we have this like favor of our parents or caretakers, it's like, it makes us feel almost like a fake love, right? Where it's like the feeling that we feel when we're in love with someone. It's like we get wrapped up into that when someone is really loving what we do, regardless of whether or not we want to or not. So let's go back. So now you have enrolled, let's take us back to how the car crash actually occurs.
Okay, so we were starting out my second year there and we were at a squadron event, and you're not allowed to have cars out there till you're a junior or senior. So after the event, I asked a senior for a ride back to the academy. He was in a Corvette convertible, the top was down. And I thought, for the first time in my life, I'm going to have some fun, because I grew up in a very conservative home. I didn't date. And here I am going to a place where there are 4,000 men. And my dad's rules were no smoking, no drinking, and no dating upper cadets. Well, at this event, the Air Force actually broke their own rules and they supplied liquor to underage cadets. And so almost everybody there was drinking. Well, I hadn't, but this guy wanted to stop at a bar, have a couple of more beers. And I was like, we got to get back to the academy or we're going to get in trouble. We have to be back by a certain time. And he didn't seem real bothered by that. And then he wanted to stop and make out. And I was like, no, we got to get back on the road and get back. And that last thing I remember was saying that to him. And then I woke up in the ICU the next day and piecing it together. My memory of what actually happened did not come back till 19 years later, when I was working at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. Went to Starbucks, my usual routine. All of a sudden, I remembered how I was sitting in the car, and I never could figure out how I amputated my left foot. I severed my right wrist. I broke my pelvis, cut up all insides of my legs. I had a 4th degree, which is the worst kind of laceration that you can have between my anal and sphincter, and had a bad road burn from sliding on the gravel. And so the paramedic that I credit with being my angel and saving my life, he came to my hospital room 10 weeks. I was in there 4 months, and told me what had happened when he got to the scene. And I talk about that in the book I wrote, You Are Deathless. But just briefly, he told me when he got to the scene, the bystanders had already, that had called in 911 and saw it or heard it happen. They had covered me up with a blanket. So I was clinically dead between 10 and 13 minutes is what he estimates.
Wow.
And when he got to me, he took the blanket off, couldn't get any vitals on me. So did something called a sternal knuckle press, which is designed to elicit pain in the body. And the only response he could get out of my body was my right eye flinched and the pupil dilated. Now, there's a saying, I think some of you may have heard this, your eyes are the window to your soul. Does that sound familiar?
Absolutely.
At that moment, Kristen, my soul, which had already left my body when I went through the windshield up into the air, that's when my angel grabbed me and took me up. So I never landed on the earth, because I knew when my body landed, I was going to die. So that angel that took me up, I later realized was my grandfather, who ironically was an alcoholic, but he, in that angelic form, was none of that earthly human experience was put onto him. And so he was the one that came and took me to the other side. But I will tell you that the message that I got from him and the other side. It didn't come back to me until 19 years old. But when my soul came back into my body, that's the part of you that lives on. That's the part of you that never dies. That soul, that breath that comes out of you when you pass, that vapor form, that's all energy. And that's essentially what we are. We are all energy. And that's why that saying everybody and everyone is connected is because we are all energy, and what one does affects the other. And if you think about the fires in Canada, the air is a shared resource. That fire and the air quality came all the way down. I'm in North Carolina now, but it came all the way down to South Carolina, and people
absolutely. It came to DC. So it was terrible. It was terrible to breathe that in. Absolutely.
So this is what I want people to understand is we are in our essence energy. Okay. And that soul form is perfect. That's what we were born with, but we get something called spiritual amnesia once we're born, and we start getting all these filters and these belief systems from others that we internalize and we never question until we are getting older now and going, wait a minute, that doesn't quite make sense. I'm not sure I believe that anymore, and to really start having that understanding of what do I really believe and start becoming aware that limiting beliefs are sabotaging you from becoming who you really are and want to be. So that soul, once it came back in, bingo, they got a blood pressure on me. It was 60/0. Now, granted, that's barely alive, but they were able to start CPR and get me to the closest community hospital. And I had a team of doctors on call that night that were angels in disguise. And I believe in angels, and we all have at least one guardian angel with us, but they show up in many ways. They're not just the angelic form that we see from, pictures in the Bible or whatever. They come in human form as well. And so the journey that I went on in the 4 months of the hospital was up and down. It was life and death every single day. And there was an operation where I actually coded and was pronounced. They called the time of death on me. My heart stopped. They went and told my parents who were in the chapel, Nicole did not survive the operation. We're sorry. You need to start planning her funeral. And I left my body again on that, except my angel James caught me and he said, Nicole, you got to get back in your body. There's a message that you are going to need to tell people. And I didn't want to get back in that body because that surgery was to have a colostomy. And if you don't know what that is, that's where they take part of your bowel and they reroute it outside so that you basically are going to the bathroom in a bag. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't live like this with everything else going on at 19 years old. I just couldn't even imagine a guy wanting to be with me and seeing that because it repulsed me. So there's a lot of layers to my story. I talk about trauma and how if your parents haven't healed their trauma, it gets passed on to you, and they have no compassion or empathy for what you're going through. And that to me is so important to do your work, to heal those trauma wounds. Because when you have a trauma, something called soul loss can happen, where your soul, in order to protect itself, fragments. And so I believe that is what happens with a lot of these veterans that are committing suicide. And I'm a 100% disabled veteran now, but I can tell you, that is a lot of veterans committing suicide in our country that has all the modern medicine and techniques, but it's a soul loss because we are not designed fundamentally to go kill other people or to be at war or any of these things where there's horror and terror and just flat out fear running your system. So there's soul fragments in order to survive. And it's just like any other wound, it's a spiritual wound, and you've got to heal that part. And now people are starting to look at that. And there's things like regression hypnotherapy, shamanism, all these different modalities to help you integrate your soul, those pieces that were fragmented, and pull them back together.
Yeah. And I look at that as also what I hear is almost like your identity changes. When you go to war, like I can talk about my father-in-law went to Vietnam at 19. There is so much that you deal with an injury that impacts your identity of who you were before and who you are after. And I think that we don't deal enough with how your identity shifts and changes and all of that, which, it's also not dealing with the trauma of what you saw, what you were a part of, all of that different stuff that I think as humans don't deal enough with trauma in general, but also as it deals with the military as well.
Yeah, you are taught to just suppress it. You don't think about it. You don't feel it. That's very much the military, black and white, right? And so you're not really allowed to have feelings, and that's another piece that most people are disconnected between their head and their body. You have got to learn to embody emotions. You can't think your way through the emotion. It's got to really get down in your body and you have to feel it. And the Chinese figured this out 5,000 years ago, that different organs were, the emotion is residing in different organs. For instance, the liver holds your anger. So it's fascinating when you look at it, but that's why it's important to address healing holistically. And you can't just focus on eating well and getting your physical activity. You've got to delve into the emotional realm, which we all have emotions that we suppressed, and those are sabotaging us from becoming the beings that we want to be. And the other piece is the spiritual piece. It's always been part of the wellness wheel, but most people have been scared to go there because they don't want to offend people. And what I say is my whole mission is to help reframe death, which a lot of authors write about as doom and gloom, and put it in that context, and that it's negative and depressing, and that instead, death, my own experience and that of thousands of other people that have had near-death experience, is death is absolute beauty, light, and loving kindness on the other side. And if we truly look at this bigger cosmic context, and that we're only here for a very, very short time, that it's going to enable us to live a happier life here, prepare for our own graceful passing, and also to support others as they approach their own transition, because the death is a shared experience. We are all going to face it. It's just we don't know when. And so that is why I wrote the book, and that is why I am just passionate about this. It's now my vocation. I quit the occupational part of life, and I'm calling myself an internality advocate, which means that your soul is everlasting. And if you know that takes a lot of fear goes away, just knowing that your soul goes on. And there's 10 common lessons that I also incorporate from a science perspective, and they're all positive, Kristen. It's like you're not judged. Whoa, what a new concept. You get to the other side. It's not about being judged. You have a life review, but there's nobody keeping score over there. Okay.
But I think a lot of people really are, when we talk about feeling judged, we feel judged. Most people feel judged every day. If you are a people pleaser or a recovering people pleaser, it's always about what other people think about you, which is why a lot of people can't even get to what they like. A lot of people don't even know what they love. They don't even know what brings them joy, because they are living life for their parents, for siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, other people, and not understanding that it really is, we're here to find what fills us up.
Right. And for our soul to evolve. We did not come here to take on our parents' or families' journeys. We came here for our own journey and what that looks like for our soul to evolve. And so, the other great news is that when we pass, we're going to see our deceased loved ones. They come in to help escort us. We are never alone. And I think that in our society today, so many people feel disconnected, and they're not feeling with the digital age and just, internet, there's a loss of connection. But I will challenge you to say that you're disconnected from self, because my experience on the other side was that we are all eternal sparks of God. There's nowhere God is not. We are not separate. And if you keep thinking you're separate, there's going to be a disconnect in loving yourself wholly. And if you judge yourself, if there's one thing I would say, please work on doing, it's not to judge yourself, not to judge your thoughts, your behaviors, your actions, because every time you judge yourself, you are shaming yourself. And that is a really low vibration. You're not loving yourself. You're doing the opposite of that. And so to start becoming aware, because awareness is the first key to changing. And when you're aware of something, you can't go backwards. You have to move forwards, because now you know there's a difference. There's a choice.
Well, you are definitely speaking my language as we talk about, shame, not shaming yourself. Also, like, I'm also tell my daughter all the time, if I hear her say something, it's like, you got to speak to yourself with love. You have to, because your brain doesn't know the difference between whether or not you're saying it or somebody else is saying it, right?
Right.
But I want to ask you this, Nicole. So what is the biggest lesson that you learned by going through this near-death experience, or several near-death experiences? What's the biggest lesson that you have for the world?
My belief systems were wrong. And had I stayed in the bubble that I was in, I would have continued to believe that, instead of becoming more expansive and understand the greater cosmic consciousness of what's going on in the world, and not to fear God, because I was taught to fear God if I screwed up. And I feared my father, which was a representation of God to me. And that I lived with fear my entire adult life. And I'm telling you, it made me sicker. It drained me. I felt depleted. I had low energy. So many of my physical conditions were a result of the false and limiting belief systems I had. And once I could turn those around and let them go, I have gotten I'm not completely healed. I mean, the injuries I have, they're going to cause me issues the rest of my life. But
and I don't think anyone is completely healed, right? It's a healing journey, just like it's a grief journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody tells you that there is an end and you will be completely healed or whatever, I would put a red flag up on that, because healing is a journey and it's not linear. A plus B does not equal C. And if you keep looking for that answer, you're going to be greatly disappointed. So I would say, having to live freely, that means without fear. Now, I'm human too, you're human. So we have to balance the humanity and the spirituality piece and live in both worlds. And of course, there's fears that come up for me, but I have to look at them. And now I run them through and I'm like, is that rational or irrational? Because most fears are irrational. And fear, if you're in fear, you lose clarity. You think about that. When you're making decisions that are fear-based, they're coming from your amygdala, that part of your brain that is in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And when you're making decisions from that part of your brain, they are not going to be for your highest and greatest good. That's why we have a prefrontal cortex, which is your executive reasoning and your visioning, and can look at things from a whole different perspective and say, yes, this is a good decision for you. And this is the part of the brain that is the awareness and goes, not so good. So it's getting out of that fight flight into the prefrontal, which is your parasympathetic system. And so much of us are riding on adrenaline from being in a constant state of arousal, and it's not serving our lives at all. And
so,
yeah.
Sorry about that. So let's go back, because I think let's get to the part where things began to shift for you. So tell us about these memories. Tell us about like everything that came together for you. Let's hear more about that part of your life.
Okay, so my memory came back 19 years. All I remember was bright white lights. That's the only memory I had of the accident until I woke up in the ICU the following morning. So I was unconscious for at least 12 hours. And so I often wondered, was that the operating room lights? So I finally had the courage to ask my surgeon, who I stay in touch with to this very day. She's a maverick in her own right, the first female surgeon in the state of Colorado, first female medical student at Jefferson College. I mean, she's a maverick.
I love it.
She said to me, no, Nicole, you were totally unconscious. It's not the operating room lights. She said, I think you had what they would call a near-death experience. In fact, she said you had several. And I was like, oh, wow. But I had no memory of it. And so at 19 years later, I just got on with my life and focused on the physical part of it. My parents told the doctor when he said Nicole needs psychological and psychiatric treatment to treat the trauma she's been through, they looked at him and my mother said, Jesus is our psychiatrist. We don't need anyone's help. And I have to tell you, everyone out there, she was wrong about that. Jesus never showed up on my couch to help me through any of this trauma. As a result, the body keeps the score, which is a great book, and it remembers. Okay. And I couldn't deal with that pain coming up. So my body chose to go, and I developed an eating disorder. And this is back in 1984. I was shoving compulsive eating, as it was known back then. I was shoving all this food down me. And that lasted for almost 20 years. That to me was the most painful part because I hated myself every time I binged, and I just couldn't throw up because I threw up so much in the hospital. It was just, I just couldn't. But every time I would tell myself, no, you're not going to do this again. I went into dietetics, became a dietitian to try to fix myself. And a lot of people do that. They go into a field trying to fix themselves and realizing, oh my God, this is not the issue. It's not the food. It's the mental illness that's going on behind the scenes and the pain I was in because I was basically being blamed for something I didn't do. And having your parents blame you for something, they said because I was in the car with them and I had 2 beers, my dad's rationale is you broke my rules, so you deserve what you got. Fast forward to last May, my roommate at the academy, who I had not talked to in 39 years, I found her on Facebook, Kristen. We had a conversation, and along with 2 other of the roommates back then who had never seen her since, she quit the academy right at Christmas of that year. She said, Nicole, I'm so sorry I caused a crash. I said, what do you mean you caused a crash? She said, we had an agreement. Don't you remember? We had an agreement. We were going back together. And when the event was over, you came over and said, okay, let's go. And I said, no, I'm going to drive this other cadet. He's drunk and I like him and I want to make out with him. So I don't really want you around, but there's one other car left and I'm sure he'll be happy to take you back. And I said, but he's been drinking. And she said, I know they've all been drinking. Don't worry about it. Have some fun. And I'll see you back at the academy. Well, she never saw me back. So she said, Nicole, it haunts me to this day. I've lived with the guilt of if I would have just done what I told you I would do. And I said, why didn't you ever tell me this? And she said, I thought you remembered and that you were angry at me this whole time. I said, I didn't remember that part. I said, that makes so much sense to me now. But this is important that people communicate because I was blaming myself. She's blaming herself. And the guy driving the car didn't blame himself. You know, it's like, I just think about all the years that I lived with that. And it just really destroyed my self-esteem. And that was part of the eating disorder, was the low self-esteem, to think that my parents could actually blame me instead of, oh my God, I'm so glad you're alive. I love you, or whatever, you know? And so to this day, when I got back in touch with them and I said, look, this is the story Margaret told, my dad looked at me and said, well, then you still made a bad decision and you should have walked back to the academy. And I just went, excuse me, F you. I haven't talked to my dad since then. And it's because he can't apologize. He can't say, Nicole, I'm so sorry that I blamed you. In his world, he has to have an explanation that he was right about this. And he actually told my siblings, this is what happens when you don't listen to me. as your father. And
so it's almost like creating fear for them as well.
Exactly. Yes. And so if you're living with people like that, first of all, that's narcissism. And second of all, it's very toxic to be around people that are continually criticizing and judging you instead of being supportive and empathetic and sympathetic. And so it's unfortunate. I never thought that that would be how my relationship with my parents would be, especially because they brand themselves as Christians. And it's very difficult for me to see how that is being Christian, because that is not what I know of Jesus, how Jesus would act, So it's been a hard journey on a religious front and with my family, and just moving forward in my life, knowing that I am here to help others and it's not about my family. I didn't write this book for my family. I wrote it for others, and it helped me heal to actually write it. And now I can really see with clarity a lot of confusion that I've had in the past with my life. The jigsaw puzzle pieces have come together, and I can now go, oh, I can see this was all for a higher and greater purpose. And it's like, wow, okay. And now I'm on the path and I feel aligned with it, but it is taking my entire adulthood, 40 years. I feel like the Israelites that were in the wilderness for 40 years, this August, it will be 40 years that crash happened. And there's not a day gone by that I haven't at some level thought about it, relived it, had an emotional trigger to it. I have PTSD now. They finally diagnosed that. The VA did after years of misdiagnosing. So it's just been a journey on so many levels, but I'm so grateful that I'm here in this present day to be able to share my message. And I hope it helps others and that it really dispels that they have anything fearful to look forward to when they die. It's all positive, all of it.
So I love it. Nicole, I have one more question for you that's just kind of like won't go away from me. So now when you look at this intersection of religion all throughout this as well, throughout your family, through impacting your belief system, what you were raised to believe as a kid as well, how has this impacted your own spiritual journey or your relationship with religion?
First of all, when people say, do you go to church? I said, nature is my church. Okay. I believe that's where I see the presence of God, whatever source, whatever you want to call it, because of the beauty, all of this amazing beauty. I don't need four walls to contain that. I have not found a group to align with that doesn't put God in a duality, okay? That he's loving, he's powerful, he's forgiving, yet there's certain rules that if you cross them, you're not going to go to, quote, heaven. And that's just not true. All of our souls go to this space of heaven. They all do. And that's where we have these life reviews. So in terms of religion, what I have found and continue to see is a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of manipulation of what Jesus said, he said. And when I also know that you cannot argue with a religious addict, you will not win that conversation. So I'm a very sensitive skin. I've had to learn to get a harder shell on me because I have been attacked about Jesus and this, even within my own family. And it's not that I don't not believe in Jesus. I just believe he's a way shower. You don't have to go through him to get to God. There's no external thing, person, place. It's all within. And we can access source directly. We don't need an intermediary because we all are an eternal spark of God. And that's that part that leaves us and is perfect and came in perfect. And then we were told we were bad, we were sinners, we were whatever. So I am very cautious about it. And I tend to just talk about my experience and my belief. And I just want to just read real quickly in my book, I was working with a little 6-year-old girl who was in a fundamental church. She was adopted. And her mother said to me, she's having problems with sleeping and wetting her bed. Is there anything you can do? So I practice neuro-emotional technique. So I worked with her on it. And she said to me, I said, well, what is your concept of God? How do you see God? She didn't understand the word concept. And she said, God is a blue spirit with colors and balloons and all different colors, no head, and can talk. So clearly this little girl is still having a direct experience with God with no filters from other people involved. And to me, that is the closest concept of God that I have heard anybody say. And it comes from a child, a pure innocence. And I can validate her on the colors, because when I was on the other side, the colors are amazing. There's more colors than I don't even know what the Crayola box holds now. Is it 120 crayons of colors? But there's more colors, and the beauty, and just, it's like you're just enveloped in this chrysalis of all of this unconditional love and brilliance. And it's just so beautiful. And that to me is kind of the way I approach life. And I do have angels that I communicate with, and it's important to ask for help from the angels. And people may think, oh, that's crazy to ask for a parking space from the angels. But every time you ask, I guarantee you, something will show up. But because we have free will, have a choice. So they know that, but the angels have said to me, please tell other people, tell them to ask us. We all are here and ready to work on their behalf. And don't just come to us in a crisis, okay? Develop that relationship like you do any other relationship. We all have at least one guardian angel that was given to us. So start that conversation. You can even ask, at night before you go to bed, can you send me some sign that you're here or what your name is? And then there's another great exercise I got from Lee Harris. If you journal, to ask your soul, what does my soul want to tell me today? Mm-hmm. So you start this dialogue with your soul, because a lot of people really don't even understand what their soul is. Growing up in the South, it was always soul food, soul music, which is amazing. But there was also the religious implication that your soul would burn in hell and you'd be eternally separated if you were a bad person, meaning you did bad behaviors. So, it's developing that whole relationship and that soul awareness, because that is what transcends.
So, Nicole, thank you so much. I want to really thank you for sharing your story. I know we talked about a lot of different things today. And so I want to thank you for having these incredible reflections on your life, for sharing your story with us. And thank you for being a guest on the Plastic Couch podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Kristen. And for anybody that wants to go to my website, I will send you the first chapter for free. And if you have my book is in your book club, I will actually, if the time zone works, I will zoom in on it and I will participate in your book club, because that's how much I really want people to talk about this, to not just keep it in us anymore, to start sharing our experiences, our beliefs, and start, that dialogue so that it becomes, we get it out of that doom and gloom and make it more light and loving and wow.
So, wow. So where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn under Nicole A. Kerr, and Facebook. Those are about the only platforms I can all maintain. But you can check out my website, www.NicoleKerr.com. That's where you can find me, or New Bern, North Carolina.
Well, thank you, Nicole, so much. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Kristen.